Today we're going to go over aperture priority mode, and in this particular mode, usually denoted with an A, and it allows you to set the aperture. Those are the f-stops, f3.5, f11, f16, and then the camera decides the shutter speed. And where this is important is when you need critical control of your depth of field. How much is in focus? Do you want just a sliver in focus, or do you want a larger area in focus? And with a larger number, you're stopping down the lens. It closes the aperture and gives you more depth of field. More wide open is a smaller number, and that actually opens the aperture. So for portraiture, for instance, you might want to have a wider aperture, f2.8 or even f1.4, and this gives a very shallow depth of field. Everything in the background goes fuzzy. And then in landscape photography, you might want to stop down to f11 or f16 to get everything in focus, from the mountain in the far back to the lake or trees or bushes that are near you. Also in macro photography, you have a very shallow depth of field to begin with, and so you may need to stop down further in order to get enough in focus. Other things that do affect depth of field, this is really important, is the focal length. So a longer focal length lens is going to give you less depth of field than a wider lens. So an 18mm lens is going to have much more in focus than, for instance, a 200mm lens at any given aperture. So if you take a 200mm lens at f2.8, it's beautiful for portraiture. Everything in the background just goes soft. Other things that affect depth of field: the closer your subject is to the camera, then the more the stuff behind it will be thrown out of focus. And then the further behind the subject the background is, the more it'll be out of focus. So ideally, if you want the background out of focus but your object in focus, you'll have your object close to you, for instance the person you're taking a picture of, and then the background, say a mountain, behind them very far away. And then you'll use a really long lens that's wide open at 2.8. And then the opposite is true the other way around. If you want everything in focus, you'll use a wider lens, get everything closer together, and then stop it down to, say, f11 or f16. Okay, so just to go over briefly, this is a 50mm f1.8, or I'm sorry, f1.4 lens. And here, looking through, you can see it's wide open. It is at f1.4. That's as wide open as it gets. And then as we stop it down, this is an old lens. Your lens probably isn't like this. We turn this, and now I'm at f5.6, and you should be able to see that we're now closed. And this one stops down to f16, and that's as small as it gets. And then again, I'll just show you how that works. So as we open it up towards f1.4, you see all the way through it, and as we stop it down towards f16, it closes into just a little point. So let's go ahead and take a look at some photos now, and so you can see really what happens.
In this first shot, you can see that the background is very blurred and the foreground is nice and sharp. And in this shot, you can see that the background is coming into focus while the foreground is unchanged. And by the time we are stopped down significantly, you can see the background's pretty well in focus, and again the foreground is still unchanged. Now I've gone to a wider angle lens, and you can see that the background is more in focus, but it's still pretty blurry when it's wide open. And just like before, you can see that as we begin stopping it down, the background becomes even more in focus, while the foreground stays focused. And in this shot, you can see as we're stopped down significantly, the foreground and the background with the wider lens seems pretty well all in focus. And here we're using an even wider lens, and even wide open, the background you can see is pretty well in focus. But as we stop down, it focuses even better. And here you can see as we've stopped down significantly, the foreground and background and everything in between is very much in focus with these wider lenses. And here I've brought the subject in even closer to kind of show what I was saying, and here, even wide open with the wide lens, the background is out of focus. But as expected, very quickly as we stop down, the background begins to take focus, even at these extreme distance differences. And once we're stopped all the way down, you can see that the foreground and background, despite the subject being inches from the lens, it's all in focus.